Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And leg strength, for a myriad of reasons, is one of those predetermining factors for success in running. We tackle both what is involved in strengthening the legs and how runners might best accomplish it, both during and outside of the run. But stick around after that for the latest from the world of running, including records on the track as well as on the roads.
Yes.
Across many distances.
And some world records.
In fact. Now, in case you've missed something that's quite important about running, you need to go to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word follow, because then you won't miss anything. But just in case, you should head to YouTube as well and some of the social platforms or the podcast places you like to listen, because we're in all of those places.
Yeah, and last week we talked about social media and how we've enjoyed connecting with you. That's still our favorite part of social media. And we spoke about last week how, well, screens can disturb our sleep. And not only the scroll, but also the light that's emitted from our screens. And Jen, who is a runner, triathlete, and a nurse, reached out with this information, telling us about blue light glasses. And I recently have acquired them. I bought them at a discount. So just, letting you know that there are some out there. And they can help with sleep and screen use. So they filter all the light that keeps your brain in constant go mode. This is what she wrote. So then when it's time to sleep, your body isn't releasing melatonin. She puts on these glasses early in the evening, and she's found that it's much easier to sleep. And she's getting better and deeper sleep. It's noticeable to her, and she's waking up more refreshed. So, and just another way to help minimize the impact.
That is very good advice. And a double thanks to the several of you who called out my hypocrisy in social media ways.
I'm so glad. Thank you, guys.
Not really. Because I am, of course, not a hypocrite. But you did mention on Strava about my comments about the social media stuff. And so that, of course, is quite fitting, is it not? So good and many good things.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we have some really compelling informations to share in terms of leg strength, so let's get started. Well, as promised in the introduction, this will be very practical for you, because assuming you do something with your legs, we're going to be talking about how to make them stronger in effective ways. Now, more particularly, I should mention that the intent of this topic right now is not just to tell you things you already know about, like strength, like lifting weights makes you stronger, stuff like that. But instead to talk about how distance runners should be approaching the process of strengthening their legs in order to train effectively, handle the kinds of training they're doing well, and then ultimately be as prepared as possible for the race. So the first thing we have to suggest is that depending on what you're doing for a race and for running, these are going to be nuanced. So this is actually a great opportunity to mention, being that we forgot to in the introduction, that this is your last chance to submit a question before our end of month question and answer episodes. So you're going to hear us talking about leg strength right now, but you're probably going to think, okay, so where exactly do I apply this in terms of my training and what I'm doing right now and what I'm trying to accomplish? That would be a great question to send us, because we might in fact answer one of those questions next week on the episode. So just a little plug there. Now, that being the case, so we want to kind of break it down in in three steps rather here. First, just like what the things are when we're talking about leg strength. And then secondly, how you can go about building strength in those areas. And then finally, what we should be doing as runners to deliberately, intentionally move through those types of things in certain times in training. Okay. That's where we're headed. Now, let's talk about the physiology, Andy. And so the first one is the one that Andy was like, well, don't explain that to me. Why is that part of leg strength? I wrote the word bones.
And that's all.
And that's it, with no explanation.
I was like, okay, give me more.
what we
So
really
give us more, Zach.
what we really are trying to say there is naturally you need bones that are resilient, right? That can
Right.
handle impact, lots of impact over time. And so as a consequence, doing things to grow that capacity, that structural integrity of your bones is key.
Right. And like my mom has osteopenia and they tell her, and actually that's debatable. It might
Depends
not
on
be
who
the
you're
case.
asking, actually.
Exactly. But many people, I don't need to give a specific example, but when strengthening the bones, that's often recommendation is doing exercise. So
Yes. Now, here's just a gentle plug for women older than about 40. They often discuss things like osteopenia being very, very common. Osteoporosis is a common thing that many people experience in general, not just women over 40. But the point is as we age, one of the things that tends to happen more commonly to women than to men is the degradation of bone density. And so this is, in fact, often a recommendation, doing things that are gently helping to reinforce your bone integrity. So they're not telling people to go run 300 miles a week, but, so there's balance. So this is a good consideration. What can we do to help reinforce our bones well as runners? And there's going to be a couple of different comments to that end, both what to do and when to do it. It's going to be good. All right. But before we get to that, let's continue on with the physiology here. So muscles in general, we could talk about them in terms of two types of fibers. Of course, there are nuances here because there's actually like more than two types of fibers. If you really read into this stuff, there's multiple types of different types of fibers.
And there's like bundles of them.
Yes. Okay. So the general concept is you have fast twitch and you have slow twitch muscle fibers, right? Type 1, type 2, but type 2 has two forms anyway. So and more. So the goal here in trying to understand these things at a simple level is that my slow twitch muscle fibers being the ones that burn when I'm doing low intensity things, my fast twitch being the ones that are responsible for power and explosion and some of that. Naturally, the way you grow them and how they even respond to stimuli are very different. And so considering then what do I need in terms of these fibers for my goal, what I'm trying to accomplish, if a marathoner is running a marathon versus a miler running a mile, those kinds of things. So we'll talk about that, but we won't necessarily spend a lot of time trying to talk about what you're doing to the muscle fibers themselves as much as just what the end result is. Are you trying to build power and explosion, or are you trying to grow, muscular endurance or something? Okay. Now, there's also functional movement, and we've talked about this a lot.
So important.
This show. Yes, it is so important because this is the concept of the things that are the strengthening of the things that are, in fact, moving in the way that I need to move to accomplish my task. Okay, so for runners, functional movement is running motion. That's not the same for like a baseball pitcher.
But with running, it's conveniently helpful for functional movement in life.
It happens to be closely related to a lot of general motion that you will be doing throughout your life. So yes. No, that's good though, because when we talk about that, then we are talking about running when we start to bring this up. And so we're not really giving you good examples of things you should be doing if you're training for the Ninja Warrior contests or something.
Right.
Great. Now,
we're
coordination.
not experts in that.
No. So the final note here is that another aspect when we're going to be discussing these things is things like coordination and stability, precision. So neurological aspects, which is like the precision types of things. How well I can command the motion in my body, that's what I'm referring to with neurological, neuromuscular.
So are you putting this as part of leg strength because
Yes.
that allows for you to get more from your muscles?
Yeah. So how strong you are is not necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio with how well you can move that strength, right? So if I move in an improper motion path, I can be very, very strong and still not accomplish the thing I'm trying to accomplish well, for instance. Okay, there's lots of nuances to that too.
So it's like the unlocking of your strength for your performance.
It's more like the appropriate implementation, but we'll go with either. It'll make more sense when we're explaining it too in context. Now, the other side of that, when we talk about things like stability, and this is a really important concept. So you have functional movement, which are essentially the muscles or tissues or bones and such, all the stuff that's responsible for moving in the way you're trying to move to accomplish your task, right? But there's also the idea that there are things that are supporting that motion in some kind of way that are not necessarily actively involved in the motion itself. But for instance, when I'm running and I land on the ground, so my ankle flexion, my knee flexion, my hip flexion, those are all key components there. But then you have like supporting muscles like in my shoulders, which if they don't hold their position well, positionally here, then I'm losing some like energy loss in my, wayward motion and such. If my arms are swinging in funny ways, all that kind of stuff, those are the supporting elements that influence my efficiency and running mechanics and such. So we'll talk about those things too, because when you sit here and you start talking about leg strength, once again, I could have very strong legs that I could be exceptionally great at single leg squats or lunges or some of those kinds of things. But then if I have terribly weak shoulders and I'm like slouching a ton while I'm running. So there's a consequence here. So we're going to talk about how those things are related simply because you can't just do the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, there's your setup. Now with the physiology, those are some of the pieces that we're going to address. Not by any means entirely comprehensive of all things physiological with legs, but close enough for our purposes. So here's how we will break this down. The ways you can go about strengthening these things. And then we'll discuss, after we've kind of laid all of that out, we'll discuss how we would recommend doing so. But you have the while running and then not while running stuff. And before we say anything about this, I've always appreciated, Andy, it was your coach who said, I want you to become a stronger animal, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Well, in that kind of sense, as runners, how we become stronger animals, we have lots of tools at our disposal. And so that's why it's really quite convenient to know that there are a lot of things that we could be doing and doing well. Okay, for example.
Yeah, and don't have it overwhelm you, though.
No, by any means.
Right.
Because most of this stuff is stuff you're just going to be doing as a part of the process, like jogging. Jogging is
So many
a
good
way,
things
while running,
about
to
jogging.
strengthen your legs, right? But what is it that jogging does specifically and why it has value? So I so many times have, in the course of my life, been on one side or completely the other of the conversation of things like junk miles.
Yeah, just stop calling them those.
I would argue there is no such thing as junk miles. That's not to suggest that there are greater and lesser effectivenesses in the things that you're doing with running, but to suggest that going out for a run and running 2 or 3 minutes slower than your normal easy running per mile pace is junk is to misunderstand
No, it gets rid of the junk.
what you're doing
It's actually the opposite.
to your body.
It's a junk
Right.
remover.
Well, it could be that. So recovery is an element there. But we're not really talking about that right now. We're talking about how those things, like something like easy jogging.
That's just a different advantage.
Yes. Strengthens things for you, right? Well, it's simple as this. Jogging easy is one of the most effective ways to grow your structural integrity, like the bone side of things that we were talking about, right? So when someone is diagnosed with osteopenia, for instance, easy jogging is one of those tools in the tool belt that is often recommended as a way, not going out and running intense mile repeats, but just slow, easy jogging, because it is very low risk and low cost. So it doesn't take much from your body to do it. So that means you can, in theory, do a lot of it, and it's very effective at this. So jogging for structural integrity also helps with muscular endurance to a degree in its own way. Now, the next one I want to mention then is taking that kind of just and scaling it. High volumes of easy running in general is a highly effective way of developing capillary development within your muscles. You know, like the things you need to carry the oxygen to your muscles. And the more capillaries you have, the more oxygen is moving to your muscles. And it just so happens that high volumes of low intensity running, well, guess what? It's very effective at capillary development. This is measured very easily over time. And Andy, what is it that you found out with your capillary development studies?
Yeah, that you don't lose them.
So
when you're losing fitness.
We'll talk about that in more detail in a later episode, the concepts of losing fitness. But for the moment, just understanding that the work that I do when I'm doing high volumes of easy running and things like the capillary development as a consequence is in fact long-term value work. So it will help me in my immediate, like in the next couple of weeks as I'm training, but it will also be substantially more valuable to me years down the road as well.
I love it.
Wow. Okay. So those are connected. But then there's another aspect while running that is often and commonly used for leg strength development, and that is
hill running.
Hill running.
And we probably could do an entire episode. In fact, I know we could do an entire episode on hill running.
Maybe one of these days we should.
Yeah.
Yes, we could. And that's because there are so many different ways.
There are so many, yeah.
Yes, and it depends on so many different factors. But so this could be a good question. If you are trying to figure out how to use hills in your training, that might be a better question answered in more specific context, in your immediate context. But in a general sense, using hills to develop leg strength is one of the most common ways that runners build power and explosion or muscular strength elements.
Yeah, and it helps with muscle recruitment as well. So it helps you with your form. You have better running economy if you run on hills because you're actually firing some of the muscles that sometimes can get lazy when you're doing flat road running.
So this is actually in concept. If you were to reflect on this and say, okay, so if I do training that is predominantly flat all the time, I'm missing a link in my functional movement strengthening process. The recruitment, as Andy mentioned, is low because I'm doing the same kind of terrain all the time. So using hills as a way to offset flat road running and things like that is good. Trail running is another example of that. Trail running helps accomplish some of that, as well as added benefits around stability and coordination. Because remember, like I said, if I'm just running in a straight line on flat ground all the time, I have a very low amount of recruitment happening in that instance. But if I'm running on trails that are like all over the place and such, the supporting muscle groups are being strengthened quite substantially. You know this because when you get done running on trails, your ankles are often sore. Why would your ankles be sore? Because they're rocking all over the place. Okay, so that's good. Hill running and unexpectedly trail running now added to our repertoire here. Now, there's lots of other things you could be doing, and we could talk about different degrees of intensity in training. And in reality, they kind of all fall under the same bin, which is when we're talking about that hill running thing. It's all the same capacity. It's just in different ways. So higher intensity running is a way to increase muscle recruitment. It's a way to train leg strength in a different sense than lower intensity aerobic running. We're not going to try to differentiate all forms of workout
for today.
Right? Not for this one.
But maybe in the future.
But there are many things that you can do outside of running that help with these kinds of things as well. And so if we can just simply try to categorize for you a lot of the different stuffs that people do, this may in fact help you understand how to leverage things like circuits and routines or weight room work and all that kind of stuff. What does that stuff do for you? And at what point do you need to be doing some of it or not? So as far as the types of things, we've got precision drills, for instance, precision drills. So these are the things that are designed for like the neuromuscular wiring movement paths kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm not trying to strengthen much or not really when I'm doing precision drills.
Do, though, as a byproduct.
Yeah, over
Like,
time.
if you're doing a bunch of pogos, you're like gonna get stronger in your calves.
Definitely does over time, but really we're talking more about trying to activate motion and trying to do so in proper motion paths so that we're training, and this is the way Jay DeSherry talks about it in his book Running Rewired, which is a great read for this kind of thing. He's talking about how you're trying to move a motion from like I have to think about it to make it happen properly to it's going to automatic happen properly on its own, autonomically, if that's the right one. And so then when we're doing that, really we need to be repeating things like precision drills a lot over time. We'll get into the how and when in a little bit, but that's the kind of stuff where you're like, you know, those dynamic activation drills you see people doing before they're running, like the skips and the hops and all that kind of stuff. That's what that's for. And it has tons of value for runners.
Does.
It's also the thing that for some reason many of us feel like is like silly. Like,
it's not
oh,
silly.
Look at those silly, serious runners doing all their drills. Those people are so serious. And I think to myself, we should all be doing that. And it's not whether we're serious or not. It's because it is so good for us as runners. And we'll talk more about why in a moment. Mm-hmm. But let's move on to some of the other ones here for a moment. So stability and coordination as exercises and drills themselves. These are the things, as mentioned, helping to strengthen the supporting muscles and tissues that are going to do the work in stabilizing the motion paths, the functional movement. And so there's a lot that we could be doing there. You know, you talk about things like core workouts and such. Most of what you do in a core workout is not directly involved in functional movement. You know, how often are you like bent way back or bent way forward at your torso when you're running? Well, you shouldn't be, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to strengthen the things that are supporting the proper posture in this instance. Okay. So there's a lot of that. And then there's the functional movement ones, as noted. And these are the kinds of things that are focused specifically on the kind of motion I'm making when I'm running. Not to suggest that they're only limited to that, but that's the goal with that kind of exercise or circuit or routine. And then, of course, plyometrics. When we start to kind of move up the ladder here, we're talking about more explosive types of things, body weight lifting and plyometrics and stuff, where I'm trying to really build muscle tissue strength now. And it's not necessarily just oriented around functional movement. You know, when you're doing something like a plyometric workout, I'm not really ever bounding on one leg as far as I can when I'm running, but the strength building that occurs by doing those kinds of repetitions certainly has value.
And usually you're doing this at the same time as you're doing these other drills, the precision drills. So a lot of times routines will have both of those
Combinations.
Things. Yeah, combinations.
Yeah. We will talk about that more too. And then the final one to note here, at least the final one we will mention at the moment, is weightlifting. So if you were to kind of walk up this ladder, we basically started at precision drills, which really are just low intensity types of things that are more neuromuscular. And then all the way to weightlifting, where you're trying to basically take really heavy stuff and move it about in a way that makes your muscles substantially more powerful. Now, the most interesting thing about weightlifting is that it tends to be the thing that runners feel like is the least necessary. And that's actually for good reason, which we'll address here in a moment. But if I understand weightlifting, so there's a lot of different ways, like people get on those machines with the resistance things, and they're doing like kind of like low weight, high rep types of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about weightlifting, I'm talking about high weight, low rep. And then the other stuff might be more like body weight lifting, categorically, functional movement things, stability or coordination things. So anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. But these are the categories. So when we're going to try to do this here, now we're going to essentially give you a plan for how to take those ideas and put them into practice in a way that best supports training for our goals as runners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is the meaty part. This is the juicy part. So priority number one, if there's like a what's the most important thing that I need to do first before I do anything else, and this is key because it is in fact the most important thing you need to do first. It is the precision and structural integrity type of stuff. So the precision is like proper motion. As runners, we often spend too little time training our bodies to move properly. There's even schools of thought out there, and I find this to be totally absurd. There are schools of thought out there that say you shouldn't try to mess with your motion habits as runners. You should just let your body do what it wants to do when you run. That's crazy. That's crazy. If every basketball coach out there told the basketball players you should just shoot the way your body wants to shoot, we would have a lot worse. No one would watch.
Baskets.
No one would watch NBA because no one would make any baskets. Like Steph Curry wouldn't exist. Okay, so the point here now, obviously, that's not a one-to-one comparison. You really can't compare running to because running is not a skill sport. But anyway,
hey,
it's not. Come on.
Skilled.
Now that being the case, it's crazy to think that it is not necessary to improve proper running mechanics because this is how you go from essentially to the greatest levels of efficiency, the greatest levels of running economy, and also the least amount of injury potential is by moving properly. But this is the best caveat here because the school of thought that says, don't mess with running motion stuff, totally wrong. It literally is totally wrong. If you buy into that, you should read other stuff. That's my encouragement. And start with Jay Deshary because this is the key here. Jay Deshary talks about how it is true that our bodies are not all the same structurally, okay? Of course it's true. Like if you were to see an x-ray of my hips and Andy's hips, you would discover how true it is that bodies are not all the same. But what that means is what we have to do as runners is try to identify what my structural factors are. Like where is my knee position and angle when I'm doing a certain motion? I find out what the structural factors are because those are the limiting factors. You can't change your body structurally very effectively, and in most instances you don't want to. But instead what you do is you find where that is, and then you establish the right motion paths within the constraints of your structural structure.
And most of our abnormalities that come from improper movements are because we, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, are training our body during the day to be in an improper position, like hunching over a computer. So
bad habits.
Right. Well, and not just that, but like necessary things that we have to do, or maybe we're doing something with just one arm all the time. We're just moving the same direction. There are lots of reasons that we're training our bodies in throughout the day, doing other things, putting a baby on the same hip over and over again, that are going to hurt us in our functional movement. So that's a reason we need to pay attention to what we're doing when we're running, is because we're not in a completely natural state of being. We are retraining and improving because we've had a lot of life stuff happen.
You know, an interesting example of this is for those of you watching, or not watching, but listening, you're going to miss a very important thing, because I'm going to show you with my hands right now the difference between my 2 feet when I'm laying on my back and my legs are neutral. My right foot goes like this. So if you're watching, you can see what I just did. It goes like this. What I'm doing is I'm tilting my hand to one side. So my right and left feet do not sit at the same angle when I'm neutral. And we've traced it. I've worked with Adam Homolka at Endurance Rehab to try to figure this out. We've traced it all the way up to my hip. So my right hip tilts slightly differently outward than my left hip. Now, that is absurd. Because why? We have no idea why. We spent a long time actually talking about that. We figure it's probably from driving. That's our best guess. Because when I sit and I drive, my right foot is always tilted slightly out on the gas pedal. Yep. So anyway, that's our best guess. But the point is, so there's a structural element there that has been formed over time. My hip is in fact tilted slightly. You can see it in my X-rays. But so that I may not be able to change that. We've talked about it. We've tried some things. May not be able to change that. We really are not that worried about it. But I do have to figure out how I should be moving within those constraints to make sure that I'm still moving effectively, efficiently. That's the whole idea there. Now, this is super challenging because I could say basically every one of us should probably go see a specialist who can help us identify our structural nuances and then figure out what should a squat actually look like for me when I'm doing it properly based off my knee positions and all that kind of stuff, right? But we don't have access to that. We all don't. So instead, what we have to remember is that there are some nuances, but inherently, I should be aspiring toward the best possible motion paths. And here's the key. Some kind of precision drill work should be a part of the repertoire of every runner for the rest of their lives. There is no moment in time, no matter if you're Galen Rupp running great marathons in the Olympics. Well, I should probably use a better example because, it's not like he's won the gold medal or anything. Sorry, Galen, but you haven't. But so the point is that we should all be doing this because bad habits are so easy to form, especially in things like running. But also, it's so hard to maintain the good motion paths. And so we have to constantly be coming back to it. We have, and we're going to put the link in the post, go to AtoZrunning.com to find it. We have a great example of a very simple drill routine that helps establish good motion paths. Compliments of Dave Hodgkinson for putting this together on his YouTube channel, and we're just simply sharing it with you. He has a dynamic activation warm-up. He calls it Warm-Up 1, and it is, in fact, very simple. Takes about 2.5, 3 minutes to do, and is a great way to just help establish some of those good precision drills. Now, that's one aspect of priority number 1. The second one is much simpler, and that's the structural integrity thing. All runners should begin any block of training when I'm starting to prepare for a goal with lots of really minimal effort jogging. Maybe for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks is probably about sufficient, but it kind of depends. My comment to any of our runners is you should basically be doing only easy jogging with rare instances of exceptions until you have built to maximum volume that you're then going to be sustaining for a training block. And that, to most runners, kind of sounds crazy, but of course, it is in fact perfectly logical because the point here is you're trying to make sure your body can handle the load you're putting on it before you start increasing intensity, which is very dangerous to do if your body is not yet able to handle the load that you're putting on it. So many people get hurt because of the intensity they're doing when they shouldn't be doing it yet.
And they think it's the volume.
I think it's the volume. Most of us tend to blame, I was running too much, and that's why I ended up hurt. And as we have found in our own experiences, and these are not ubiquitous experiences, but with our own athletes, with ourselves personally, and with the things that we've read about this, it seems to be the case that if a person is running much easier at higher volumes, that these comments almost never happen. But that the volume is to blame, is what I mean. But the point is, regardless of what you're trying to do in that capacity, the idea of minimal effort, easy jogging is the most effective and least risky way to build your structural integrity, your leg strength in terms of like your bones and some of the musculoskeletal side of it. Best way to do that, and good to do so before you try to start heaping on intense efforts, before you try to start doing anything crazy, certainly long before you're trying to race at hard efforts. And it will pay off dividends if you do that first. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're doing both of those at once. Your proper motion paths and your structural integrity are your initial focus, and you're doing them at the same time. And you're doing the proper motion stuff all the time. But then priority number 2 comes into play, because what you're really talking about here is, now I'm doing those things as kind of like baseline stuff, but what's the stuff that I should be doing as I'm growing that, or potentially once I've kind of started to establish that stuff better? Then we could talk about functional movement and stability and coordination strengthening. Mm-hmm. And these are everyone's favorite like workout circuits and routines. This is your your squats and your lunges and your single leg hops and this kind of stuff. And I do say you could do this kind of thing at the same time as the other stuff we're noting above, but we don't like to do too many new things at once as runners. It tends to be another way that we risk ourselves immensely. So it might be good like a week or 2 of the other stuff before I start trying to add in some functional movement things, especially because that precision work is in fact going to help the functional movement work be more effective. Mm-hmm. So keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Now, when we talk about functional movement for runners, of course, we're really talking about the key areas that we need in order to move well while we're running. And that is like your back, trunk, posture related stuff. That's your hip, girdle, upper leg area stuff. And that's your lower leg, ankle, foot stuff. Those are the 3 key areas as we would delineate them. I should be doing something to address all 3 of those areas every week. And the best formula there is like 2 days a week doing back, trunk, posture stuff, 2 days a week doing hip, upper leg stuff, 2 days a week doing foot, ankle, lower leg stuff. That's the easiest way to break it up.
Short little bits.
15 minutes maybe for a routine. And if I'm talking about 15 minutes a day and I'm doing that 6 days a week and it's a very easy routine so I don't have to like spend a ton of time trying to remember it every time, that's not too bad, especially if you think about like you can do this any time of day. This does not have to be done in proximity to the run. It can be like, I run in the morning, but I don't have a ton of extra time before I got to jump off to work. So maybe I'll just do this in the evening right after dinner. Get the kids to join in because that's fun.
Our kids actually like it. So
yeah,
it's been fun.
That's because they're still little enough to think that their parents are cool. Won't last much longer. No. All right. Now, aside from, of course, the obvious of like targeting those areas, we have to think about when I'm doing these kinds of things, I'm trying to do the motions that mirror the running thing. So in terms of squats, for instance, a regular standard squat is not a bad thing to do for runners, but far better is a single leg squat in a runner posture position. Things like that.
That's what's called a single leg runner squat.
In fact, that is the term you'll find if you Google it. So yes, and these are the ways I think about the best use of my time. Okay, so I could do both of them if I have enough time, but most of us aren't looking for how many things we can do. We're looking for what's the simplest, most efficient routine to accomplish this thing. So that's where we look at. Most of it's going to be single leg types of things. Running, you don't ever use both legs at the same time on the ground. So I need to do a lot of stuff with single leg. The balance and stability that comes from that is key, even if it's not exactly a running motion. You've seen like the single leg deadlifts where you're like, your leg is straight, you're leaning down and grabbing something and you're pulling it straight up with your back leg going out straight, all that kind of stuff. You're never going to do that while you're running. But the stability coordination side of what that's doing is great. And because you're doing it on one leg, that's a key factor. Things like rotationary forces, you're not rotating a lot while you're running, but strengthening and stabilizing your rotationary forces is a key thing so that it takes minimal effort for your body to hold its linear position.
In the planes.
Right.
Yes. Which we didn't mention yet, but that's why we do the Lunge Matrix.
Yeah. Because then you do multiple planes of motion. And so you're talking about your sagittal, your frontal, as well as your transversal.
Transverse.
Thank you. Those 3 planes of motion. Yes. So this is like diversity in our repertoire is a key factor here because there's so many things happening while we're running. We want to see if we can't address in a substantial degree enough all the things that we need. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we've got a simple formula there. Do something 2 days a week for each of the 3 areas, and you're well on your way. Now, we're not going to give you a routine for every single one of those at this exact moment, but that might be another great question to send, because we could certainly help address more specifically. But we do have one, at least, a good start for a stationary leg strength routine that helps address both factors, the functional movement and the stabilizing. And we're going to put a link to that as well in the post, AtoZrunning.com, and it's on YouTube. You can find it there certainly too.
Absolutely. So our next priority is power and explosion.
So this is the one that is often considered the least valuable for distance runners. Like, why do I need explosive power as a runner? And of course, the answer is, well, you don't as much as those other things. If we're talking about just in the context of the other things we've discussed, this is the least important. That's why it is priority number 3.
But it still is helpful.
But it is not important at all. It's just not as important as those other things. So I have to focus my attention. If I'm talking about a training block right now, I should be considering the first, like maybe the first month or 2, if not a little bit more than that, but it depends on how long my training block is. The first month or 2, I should be focused on that other stuff, probably in exclusion, and not really worrying about power and explosion during that time. I'm trying to establish the foundations that I need well first. And part of the reason for that is because power and explosive types of workouts are both more risky and less effective if I haven't built a strong foundation of functional movement and structural integrity and that kind of stuff. So, and the reason is, if you talk to anyone who does something like a plyometrics workout when their body's not ready to handle it, they're going to start talking about they're super sore. They're going to start talking about how like they're tweaked a calf a little bit, all that kind of stuff. The body was not ready for that type of workout yet. And many of us run into this fault where we want to hit the weight room, hit those weights hard, where we haven't really done the work to set our body up for success in that moment. Okay, so here's the work that we need to do to set us up. And what it boils down to is there's a lot of different ways you do these kinds of things. So we talked about hill running earlier. We talked about weight room types of stuff. The key is that you're looking for increased muscle output, like raw power types of output. And this also, for any kind of runner, is a piece of your efficiency. Andy mentioned muscle recruitment, right? So we have to have high levels of muscle recruitment if, no matter what distance we're running, if we want to have the highest possible efficiency. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is valuable for all of us, but don't do it before they're doing those other things. Now, here's what the it is. Okay, so let's talk about hill running for a second. We were mentioning this earlier. Any kind of uphill running forces a degree of motion that is not exactly the same as flat ground running. You have to lift your knees a little bit higher. If you don't, you're going to be tripping on your face. As a matter of fact, if you're doing uphill running, it's to your benefit to even exaggerate your knee drive a little bit more. Lift your legs just a little bit more than you need to, because that's, in principle, that's what you're trying to help strengthen during that time. So you boost it along with an exaggerated knee lift motion to a degree. Lydiard even recommended for his runners, initially for all his runners, although this has changed over time, and I'll tell you why, but he recommended a kind of, it's almost like a plyometric workout uphill. Bounding, springing. So he actually has 3 phases. The first phase is kind of like just a high knees thing. You're really just running with high knees. It looks really silly, but it's very hard. And you do this uphill. And he wanted his runners to do this on a half-mile hill. So they're going up for half a mile. It was not exactly uphill the whole time, the hill that they used. But and then they would do high knees, and then they would do hill bounding, which is like try to leap for distance with each stride, and then hill springing, which is leaping for height with each stride. And it's not easy. It is very hard.
I would imagine.
Why did this evolve over time and not become the recommendation for all runners? Because too many people get hurt doing it.
Yeah. I have a hard time with hill stuff.
Yes, most do, in fact, who are not under 25 years of age. And so that's the delineation. If you're a young runner and you're looking to build leg strength after you've been establishing a good training block already, this is a great kind of workout for you. If you're not injury prone and you're very healthy at that exact moment. Remember though, it's after you've done all that other stuff. You cannot do a hill bounding workout fresh out the gate without risking substantial injury for anyone. So if you're not a young runner though, I do not recommend you do this at all because it just simply proves to be too risky for most of us. So instead, we look for just doing a kind of like uphill repeat experience. And we like, as distance runners, a longer hill. I'm not going to do like a 30-second hill sprint because it's not quite as valuable to me as like a 3-minute just kind of good hard effort. And again, do that exaggerated leg lift motion. But that's a great way to help build my leg power, some of my muscle output things, higher levels of recruitment. That's very good for me. It's especially helpful when I am in the late stages of a training block. I would suggest, if I'm going to do something like this, I want it to be certainly at least 4 to 6 weeks before my goal race. I'm not messing around with this kind of stuff once I'm within like 4 weeks of my goal race, but in that kind of that in-between period somewhere in the middle, that's a good time for it. Okay?
Sounds good.
But that's just when you're running. Of course, there are other things you can do, and this is where we talk about like the weight room type of stuff. Plyometrics workouts themselves. Those often can be, a plyometric workout can be a little bit more controlled situation than hill, and you can do it in such a way that you can minimize risks, do it on grass or soft surfaces. Even some of these things you do on like a gradual incline on grass, that kind of work is a way to help kind of target what constraints you might have or concerns you might have and minimize risk while still getting some benefits of these things. And we have included here one more for you, a link to one of our workouts, a leg strength workout that is itself a kind of plyometric workout, a lot of single leg springing types of things that are pretty low intensity, but certainly high value. However, many like the weight room.
Yeah.
And that's okay as long as we have it in its proper place. This is that time where I would suggest I would not want most runners to be spending a lot of time in the weight room during the first 8 weeks of a training cycle. Occasionally here and there, some people are doing that because it's something that they just do regularly no matter what.
Right, exactly. Because it
So
might
that's
be
fine.
your routine already, and that's totally fine. You've already built some strength to be able to sustain that.
But I would not throw it in at the same time as introducing all of these other things too. So instead, I wait a bit once I've established some of that stuff. And then how do I target weightlifting as a distance runner? And I think one of the mistakes that runners tend to make is they do this like low weight, high rep approach, which is itself basically a kind of anaerobic workout for your muscles, right? It is what it amounts to. And that's good in terms of you're probably strengthening those muscles, but it's actually also bad because it's inducing the need for greater recovery. If you're getting sore every time you're lifting weights, you're reducing the benefits of your running training that you're doing. And so we have to weigh the cost benefits here. There's a much better approach for weightlifting for runners that helps achieve the goal in a more effective way, but also more efficiently in terms of training on the whole. And that is the opposite, where you're doing high weight, low reps, so like maybe 3, 4, 5 reps of something. And what you're trying to do is keep it within the 10 to 15 second window. So if it takes me 10 seconds to do 2 reps on the machine or with the free weight, I'm going to only do 2 reps. And just stick within that 10 to 15 second window. And then I have substantial rest between each bout, like 2 to 3 minutes before I do anything else with that muscle again. And the reason for this is because I'm trying to give my body total recovery between things. I'm trying to use the creatine phosphate stuff as my muscle fuel so that I'm not going anaerobic substantially. And as a consequence, I don't have massive muscle fatigue as a result. It certainly is going to potentially make me sore to a degree.
Because your muscle's tearing a little bit.
Initially. But I should be really trying to avoid substantial soreness with these kinds of things. And so instead, that's one approach that I can use with the weight room. Helps accomplish a similar goal with that power side of it. So
that's a lot of information. Thank you, Zach.
Okay, so let's quick summarize. For runners, I have to think about these things in terms of priority order in my training, because these are certain things I need first and always before other things. And so I need the proper motion paths and the neurological, neuromuscular types of things. And so precision work is of highest importance early on and throughout. I should always be doing things for this kind of stuff. And then the structural integrity is my bone health, my musculoskeletal health, all that kind of stuff. I really need to be attentive to that before I try doing crazy amounts of training. And so that's where the easy jogging, and I build the easy jogging load over time to try to get to a substantial amount of easy jogging. Once I've done that, then I say I'm ready for other things in training. And so for some of us, that could take 4 weeks. That could take 6 weeks. Like, that's okay. If it does take a while, that's okay. But because you're doing really minimal effort jogging, you also don't need to grow it as slowly. So there's a consideration there.
Absolutely. And we didn't mention this one thing that I did for the Olympic trials when had some vulnerabilities with my hips, as all of you know, if you listen to this podcast, and then some just residual effects from that. But I was doing a lot of steady states on hilly routes on purpose to grow some leg strength when I wasn't able to do like hill repeats, for instance. So doing the steady state running on hills was a way to gain some great recruitment for my muscles and also some leg strength there.
Yes, a good example. So if we're trying to get these things right, of course, we have to be really trying to answer the question of what do I need to be doing because of where I am in training and where I'm trying to go with my goals and my needs. And we really can't do that here in this moment just by talking about in generals. So if you would love to share a question in terms of the context of your own training, then we would love to answer that in more precise detail of how that might look for you. And we'll always continue to provide more examples and things like that along the way. Mm-hmm. But for now, at least, that's something to get you started in how best to build leg strength.
Mm-hmm. Now on to the world of running.
Well, first, let's start by acknowledging another A to Z runner who, in this instance, ran for the entire 24 hours.
An entire day.
An entire day from 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. So, yes, Chad, well done.
Congrats.
Completing the Farm Days 24-hour run in 108 miles.
Woo! That's
wow.
a long way.
And I feel like what captures it so well is there's something from one of his team leaders on social media where they asked him how he was feeling at one point, and he just doesn't answer. And I think that so well captures, like, I am doing this thing, and nothing's going to stop me from doing this thing. And I have no doubt that whatever he wanted to say in answer to the question, how are you feeling right now, it wasn't necessary. It need not have been said. Yeah. He was doing it.
He was doing it.
And well done.
Super done, well too, because he tied for 4th overall in the entire event. So
yes.
Yeah.
So good.
Congrats to Chad.
All right. Well done, Chad. But
there's more.
There's more.
First world record from a name that's mentioned almost as much as Keir D'Amato, Jakob Ingebrigtsen. He set a new world record in his very first in the 1,500 meter indoor race. That was the 2022 Athletics Indoor Tour in Leuven. And he ran a time of 3:30.60.
Indoors. In
In
1,500 meters.
That's insane. And he was in the race with the current record holder, Samuel Tefera. And so they were together in this race. And everyone knew that Jakob was going to be going for this time, but to have like the record holder, the current record holder in the race with him, it added a lot of drama. It was a lot of fun to watch. And he ended up breaking the record by about a half a second. And then Tefera ended up in second place. So exciting race to watch.
Note that he did break the Olympic 1,500 meter record as well in the Tokyo Games when he ran the gold medal time.
How old is he? Like 21?
Olympics. He's 21 now. He was 20 at the Olympics.
Now. Holy cow.
And so, like, and that's a faster time, but it's an outdoor track. Indoor is always slower times as far as the records. But so it's not surprising to people. And most people are saying, it's really just been a matter of time before he starts breaking world records, which is, this kind of the sense of inevitability around him because he's just basically done everything so far, except for broken all of the world records. So how many might be the better question.
How many? Oh, so exciting. Little back note that I wasn't aware of before seeing this news is that Jakob is now being coached by his brother Henrik, or at least his training is being overseen by his brother Henrik because his father, Gert Ingebrigtsen, stepped down from coaching his kids a couple months ago. So I didn't realize that had all happened too, which could have shaken him, but it didn't seem to.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly like a tight family unit going on in terms of the training. Like Gert has coached his brothers to world class, and other siblings.
7 kids, guys.
Yep. And so, and he's been training with his brothers for years and years. And so, whether it's dad or brother or, there's certainly other people involved too. But it's an interesting kind of thing going on with these guys and cool to see, the brother step up and kind of sustain some of the progress here too.
This is totally not super related, but we watched the event, which I will link to, and I highly recommend it. But the environment at that indoor track is not something I have seen here.
And you won't.
Well, maybe
ever.
in the future. I don't know. Well, they had clapping that was going around the track.
They were doing the wave. With the runners in the lead as they were going
with
around.
The runners
like almost the whole
lead.
race.
It was so cool. And then there was like cheerleaders, and it was packed. It was just like,
I might say that was a little less cool.
Well, I'm just saying that there was like a hype, like this really
there was
cool
that
hype around
energy.
There's a nice energy at the stadium.
But it's this is neither here nor there. In Europe, track is a thing. It's a big thing, and when there's a track meet in town, people go to it. In the United States, most people don't realize that track is a sport,
meet is happening,
or even that it's a sport at all. So. That of course
we do
is the
very
difference.
well at it, and we have high-profile meets, but we just don't have those kinds of crowds here in the United States. So hopefully we'll get there. I'm hopeful.
I'm not, but things happen.
Zach is the pessimist. I am the optimist.
Number two
is also containing a world record. USATF Track and Field 100-mile national championships.
100 miles.
100 miles. Camille Herron set her own
breaking her
new
own
100-mile world record in 12 hours, 41 minutes, and 11 seconds. And that's beating her previous mark by about 70.
About 90 seconds.
90 seconds, yeah.
And Andy, you have mentioned this is not a slow pace.
This is not a slow pace. 7-minute, 37-second miles.
For 100 miles.
For 100 miles. That means she's running faster than that because she's having to stop for stuff. So
yeah, I mean, obviously, so when they do these kinds of her races, like no one's stopping the clock when you got to take a pause, right? And you're certainly not actually running 100% of the 100 miles. So her running pace is faster than 7:30. Wow.
And a huge congratulations to her also, because this was her debut as a Masters runner. Not her debut, but,
Wait, which category, though? Because USA allows people to run Masters races at age 25.
I'm pretty sure it's...
And that doesn't count.
No. But that's happening here soon, so I'm excited that we're going to be covering that. But that doesn't qualify. This is like true Masters. And she also, en route, got another world record, and that was the 12-hour world record with 94.5 miles.
Naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Those two are very closely linked, and so what ends up happening a lot of the time is when someone gets a 100-mile record, they get the 12-hour record too. Right. That's pretty common.
Yep.
So wow. It's nothing
Absolutely
like running
incredible.
one race and getting two records.
Yeah. And also I wanted to congratulate our previous podcast guest, Stephanie Flippen, who was third place. She gave me a little bit of an inside scoop about her race, and it was like one of those really hard ones. Even at mile 60, she was having to
suggest that a 100-mile race is sometimes not?
She said that she's run, like, her PR race was more comfortable than this one. This was a more uncomfortable experience, and she just mentally had to dial in, and she had a headache from being so focused. So,
wow.
Anyway, I find that super valiant. Congrats, Stephanie. Inspiring stuff there.
Valiant. Good
valiant.
Word.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, number 3, let's stick with distance running a minute, but not quite like that. And in the Ras Al Khaimah half marathon,
which is in the United Arab Emirates.
The UAE, known for fast races, by the way. They've got a couple courses out there for a marathon, half marathons in the UAE that are very regularly record-breaking races.
Yes, and the reason why we're mentioning this race is because Paula Radcliffe's 21-year-old British half marathon record went down by none other than Eilish McColgan.
Eilish McColgan!
Who we've talked about quite a bit on this podcast because she's been doing a lot of that lately. In fact, she broke her mother's, Liz McColgan's, Scottish record at the same time she got the British record.
Why not?
So her time was 66:26 over Paula's 66:47.
Wow.
And her mom's was 67:11. So, I mean, she is in the history books. Obviously, she was already, but to be beating Paula's 21-year-old record is a big deal.
In fact, it is.
Mm-hmm.
There tends to be kind of like benchmark comparisons for running over the years. Certain people that's like, if you could do the thing that they did, then you're the next king kind of thing. And so in terms of the United Kingdom and Europe on the whole, anyone who can do the things that Paula Radcliffe did puts them in that level of like, is this person one of the best ever? Eilish McColgan is in that conversation.
Well, I do want to mention a couple of the gals up front. Ethiopia's Germawit Gebru, she won in a course record time of 1:04.14. Woo! Over Helen Obiri, who just joined on Athletics, and she'll be moving to Boulder. I think she might have already done that, but she's been traveling, so I'm not.
Yes.
Anyway, Helen ran a personal best time of 64.22. So
amazing.
Good stuff there.
Which more than prior to a year and a half ago, those would have been world record times. So
right. Let's keep it in perspective here.
Yep. Good times all around. Oh, bonus,
because I had to mention another record. Keely Hodgkinson broke the British 800-meter indoor record in a time of 1:57.20.
Is she still a teenager?
I mean, she seems like it.
She's so young and just running
really
world
young.
class all over the place.
Is she 19?
I think so, but I don't really remember
19.
for sure.
She was at the Olympics, I think.
Not only, though, did she just run a new British indoor 800-meter record, but she did so shortly after an injury.
Yeah, she tore her quad in early January.
Okay. So one must assume that there's even more in store for this phenom.
And she ran the fastest indoor 800-meter time in the world in 20 years.
Oh.
1:57.20, folks. That is a phenomenal time in outdoor. But she ran this indoor.
Yep. Well, these are the things.
These are the things that are happening in the world of running.
And this is one of the reasons why we are so excited all the time.
And we keep doing it and showing up every week because there's not enough coverage of this stuff, and history is happening now. So we want you to hear the fresh news every week. We always have things to talk about because there's always phenomenal running that inspires us all over the world.
And don't forget that next week on the show, we are answering your questions about your training situations and needs and your racing ideas and all the other stuffs. So what you need to do if you want your question addressed on air is just send it to us. Yeah. But make sure to include all the context. Like, here's the things I'm doing. Here's the stuff I'm thinking about. What do you think? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that provides for an even better answer because then we can be more precise to what you're asking.
Absolutely. And context is always best.
How do you ask us those questions? Well, that's a great question to ask us. Thank you for asking that question too. You can do so most easily on any of the places where you find our content. So if you're on social media, put a comment.
Yeah.
If you're on YouTube, put a comment. But head to AtoZrunning.com and there's a contact on the bottom of the page. Also, there's a contact on nearly every page, and you can find a way to reach out there.
Yes.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.